I'm Alina, 36 female. I live in a small suburban town that always felt like the perfect place to raise a family, a place where white picket fences weren't just a metaphor. I'm a freelance graphic designer, a job I pieced together between school runs and soccer practice. And for 12 wonderful years, I was a wife to the kindest man I've ever known. My life was built around my husband, Daniel, and our two children, Mia and Leo. But in the blink of an eye, that entire world was ripped away from me. This is the story of how the people I thought were my second family left me to drown, and how a final, secret gift from my husband allowed me to not only save myself, but to show them the true meaning of loss. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The world doesn't stop for grief. That was the first and cruelest lesson I learned in the days after Daniel's accident. One minute, he was heading off to a site inspection, a quick kiss at the door and a promise to be home for dinner. The next, he was a phone call from a stoic-sounding police officer, a series of blurred images in a hospital waiting room, and then nothing. An emptiness so vast and consuming it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, stealing the very air from my lungs. He was 39, a good man, a brilliant civil engineer who built bridges for a living, and the unshakable foundation of our family. Now, he was gone. In those first few weeks, our house was a revolving door of sympathy. Casseroles appeared on the doorstep, cards filled the mailbox, and friends offered hollow-eyed condolences. Daniel's family, his parents, Beatrice and George, and his older sister, Sophia, were a constant presence. Beatrice, a retired school principal who carried herself with an air of unshakable authority, took over my kitchen, organizing food and directing visitors with crisp efficiency. George, a former bank manager who valued order above all else, began making calls, talking about accounts and paperwork in hushed, serious tones. Sophia, a real estate agent with a perfectly curated life and a phone that never stopped buzzing, fluttered around the edges, offering platitudes that sounded like they were lifted from greeting cards. They called me Poor Alina. They hugged my children, Mia and Leo, with performative sadness, ruffling their hair and telling them how brave they were. "We're here for you," Beatrice would say, her hand on my arm, her grip firm and controlling. "Daniel was our son. We will not let his family suffer." At the time, drowning in a sea of shock and sorrow, I believed her. I clung to those words like a life raft. They were family, after all, his blood. They had known him his entire life, and I thought their grief must be as deep and raw as my own. I saw their efficiency and their controlled sorrow as strength, a rock for me and my children to lean on. I was so wrong. The foundation they presented was nothing more than sand, and the tide was about to come in. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing by the graveside, holding Mia's hand on one side and Leo's on the other. They were so small, so lost. Mia, at 11, was trying to be strong for me, her jaw set and her eyes wide with unshed tears. 7-year-old Leo just seemed confused, periodically asking when Dad was coming home. I saw Beatrice dabbing a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief while George stared stoically into the distance. Sophia was checking her phone behind her black-gloved hand. I registered it on some distant level, a small, discordant note in a symphony of pain, but I dismissed it. People grieve differently, I told myself. After the last of the guests had departed, leaving behind the scent of lilies and the lingering chill of the cemetery, the 4 of them sat me down in my own living room. It felt like a board meeting. George had a leather-bound notebook on his lap. "Alina," he began, his tone less like that of a grieving father and more like a financial advisor about to deliver bad news. "We need to talk about the practicalities." He explained that he and Beatrice had taken the liberty of looking into Daniel's finances. He talked about the mortgage, the car payments, and the credit card debt from a recent kitchen renovation. He mentioned that Daniel, being the primary earner, had managed most of their finances. I knew this, of course. My freelance work was supplementary, helping with groceries, kids' activities, and the occasional vacation. Daniel's salary was what paid the big bills. The fact is, Beatrice cut in, her voice sharp and devoid of the comfort she'd offered just days before, Daniel was a wonderful man, but perhaps not as prudent as we'd hoped. This is a very large house for 3 people. My heart clenched. It wasn't a very large house. It was our home. The home Daniel and I had chosen together, the walls that held the echoes of our children's laughter and the pencil marks on the doorframe charting their growth. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sophia sighed dramatically. "What Mom is saying, Alina, is that you need to be realistic. You can't possibly afford to stay here on your little design jobs." The condescension in her voice was a physical slap. She had always dismissed my career as a hobby. George cleared his throat. "Your freelance income is inconsistent. We've run the numbers. After the funeral expenses are paid from his primary account, there won't be much left. You'll need to sell the house. Quickly." I stared at them, my mind struggling to process the cold, hard calculus of their words. The grief was still a raw, open wound, and they were dissecting my life like an autopsy. There was no, "We'll help you figure this out." There was no, "Let's see what we can do to support you." It was a verdict: sell, downsize, disappear. "What about support?" I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a safety net, some reassurance that the people who claimed to love us wouldn't let us fall. Beatrice's expression hardened. "We've done so much already, Alina. We helped plan the funeral. We're advising you on the finances. We have our own retirement to consider. George and I aren't made of money, and Sophia has her own family to think about." Sophia nodded eagerly, adding, "Exactly. My kids have orthodontist appointments and summer camps. We all have responsibilities." It was a master class in deflection and selfishness, delivered with the polished veneer of practicality. They were drawing a line in the sand, and my children and I were on the other side. That night, for the first time, I cried not just from grief, but from the terrifying realization that we were utterly and completely alone. The world Daniel had built to protect us had been shattered, and his family, the people I thought would help me pick up the pieces, were the ones standing by, ready to sweep us away with the dust. The change was as swift as it was brutal. The day after our practical discussion, the casseroles stopped. The phone calls trickled to a halt. My in-laws, who had been a suffocating presence in the immediate aftermath of Daniel's death, simply vanished. It was a strategic, coordinated withdrawal, so complete it could only have been deliberate. My texts to Beatrice asking for advice on a leaky faucet went unanswered for days until a curt reply came. "Call a plumber, Alina. That's what they are for." When I called George to ask a question about a bank statement, he was short and dismissive, telling me he was busy and that I needed to learn to handle these things myself. Sophia, who had promised to take Mia and Leo for an afternoon to give me a break, canceled at the last minute via text, citing a sudden, can't-miss client meeting. She didn't reschedule. The silence from them was louder than any argument. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of abandonment. Every unanswered call, every ignored text was a fresh wound. I felt like a fool for ever believing their hollow promises of support. Their grief, it turned out, was for their son, not for his wife or his children. We were not part of their family. We were his attachments, loose ends they were eager to snip. The worst part was the impact on the children. Mia and Leo adored their grandparents and their aunt. They were used to weekly Sunday dinners, birthday parties, and spontaneous visits. Now there was nothing. "When are we going to see Grandma Beatrice?" Leo would ask, his little face full of confusion. "Is Grandpa George mad at us?" Mia, older and more perceptive, didn't ask as many questions. Instead, she retreated into herself, her preteen angst now compounded by a grief and confusion she couldn't articulate. She heard me on the phone, leaving another unanswered voicemail for her grandmother, and I saw the understanding and hurt dawn in her eyes. They weren't just ignoring me, they were ignoring them. They were erasing Daniel's children from their lives. The financial pressure mounted with terrifying speed. George had been right about one thing: the numbers didn't lie. Without Daniel's income, our savings were draining like a breached dam. The mortgage payment loomed, a monstrous figure that made me feel sick to my stomach. The credit card bill from the renovation, which Daniel had insisted we do, saying we deserved a beautiful space, was now a source of constant anxiety. I took on every freelance project I could find, working late into the night after the kids were in bed, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. My designs, once a source of creative joy, became a desperate scramble for cash. I was selling off pieces of my creativity to keep the lights on, but it was never enough. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. The grief was a constant companion. Iron, a shadow that followed me from room to room. Some days, just getting out of bed felt like a monumental achievement. I would stand in the shower and cry, the sound of the water masking my sobs, giving myself just 10 minutes to fall apart before I had to paste a brave face on for the children. I had to start making cuts. I canceled our cable subscription, then the internet, relying on my phone's hotspot for work. I switched to generic brands at the grocery store, my cart filling with pasta and canned sauces instead of the fresh produce Daniel and I used to enjoy. I told Mia we couldn't afford her gymnastics class anymore. The look of quiet disappointment on her face broke my heart into a million more pieces. "It's okay, Mom," she said, trying to be the adult. I didn't like it that much anyway. But I knew she loved it. I was failing them. I was failing Daniel's memory. I was losing the life he had worked so hard to build for us. One afternoon, about 2 months after the funeral, I hit my breaking point. A letter had arrived from the bank, a formal notice that our mortgage was in arrears. The word foreclosure was printed in bold, unforgiving letters. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I felt the walls of my beautiful home closing in. In a moment of pure desperation, I called Beatrice. I swallowed my pride, the bitter taste of it coating my tongue, and I laid it all bare. "Beatrice, I'm in trouble," I said, my voice trembling. "The bank sent a letter. I don't know what to do. I'm going to lose the house." I waited, praying for a flicker of the matriarch who had promised to protect us. Instead, I was met with a sigh of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Elena, we talked about this," she said, her tone icy. "You are living beyond your means. We told you to sell the house months ago. This is the consequence of your own inaction. George and I raised our children to be responsible. We cannot be expected to bail you out of poor financial decisions." Poor financial decisions? My husband had just died. My inaction was grief. Her words were so cruel, so detached from reality that for a moment I was speechless. "He was your son," I finally whispered. "These are your grandchildren. And we are very disappointed that his legacy is being squandered," she retorted. "Perhaps if you spent less time mourning and more time being practical, you wouldn't be in this position. You need to stand on your own 2 feet, Elena." It's what Daniel would have wanted. Then she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. That was it. The final door had been slammed in my face. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. They were leaving us to sink. The cold silence had been a warning. This was the verdict. They had judged me, found me wanting, and sentenced me and my children to an existence they no longer had to witness. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid bills and a foreclosure notice, I felt a new emotion begin to bubble up through the grief and despair. A cold, hard knot of anger. They thought they could just walk away. They thought they could erase us. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The weeks that followed my final, horrifying phone call with Beatrice were the darkest of my life. The foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen counter, a constant, mocking reminder of my failure. I started packing boxes, a slow, heartbreaking process of dismantling the life Daniel and I had built. Each photo frame, each coffee mug, each one of the kids' crayon drawings I took down from the fridge felt like a tiny surrender. I was looking at classified ads for small, 2-bedroom apartments in rundown parts of town, trying to figure out how I could possibly afford even the cheapest rent. The freelance work had slowed to a trickle, my desperation seemingly scaring off potential clients. I was selling furniture online for a fraction of its worth just to buy groceries. Mia and Leo watched me with wide, worried eyes, their childhood innocence eroding with every whispered phone call I made to the bank, begging for an extension I knew I wouldn't get. Hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. I had scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent to start the process of a short sale on the house. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzling, a perfect match for my mood. I was sitting at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a local area code, but not one I recognized. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another creditor, but something made me answer. "Hello," I said, my voice flat and tired. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Alina Wallace?" a man's voice asked. It was calm and professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Arthur Albright. I'm an attorney with Albright and Associates. I was your husband, Daniel Wallace's estate lawyer." My breath caught in my throat. An estate lawyer? Daniel had never mentioned one. We had. Simple wills drawn up years ago when Mia was born, but that was with a different firm. I think you have the wrong person," I stammered. "My husband and I used a different firm for our wills." "I'm aware of that, Mrs. Wallace," Mr. Albright said patiently. "Daniel retained my services privately about 18 months ago for a separate matter. He instructed me to contact you, and only you, in the event of his passing." I must apologize for the delay. I've been out of the country on an extended family matter and only just returned and saw the news. It was a terrible shock. He was a fine man. My mind was reeling. A private lawyer? A separate matter? What could Daniel have been doing that he kept from me? A dozen paranoid thoughts flashed through my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Was there another family, a secret debt? "A separate matter?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yes. Mrs. Wallace, would it be possible for you to come to my office? I have some documents for you. I believe it would be best to discuss this in person." The thought of driving downtown, of trying to navigate a conversation about yet another unknown problem, was overwhelming. But what choice did I have? I agreed to meet him the next afternoon. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my imagination running wild. I thought about Daniel's last year. He had been working longer hours, sometimes seemed distracted, but I had chalked it up to stress from a big bridge project he was managing. He was always a little more reserved around his family than he was with me, often deflecting their questions about our finances with a vague smile. I had never thought anything of it. Now, these memories felt like clues to a mystery I didn't know existed. Mr. Albright's office was in an old, respectable-looking brick building downtown. It was the kind of place with dark wood paneling and shelves lined with thick, leather-bound books. It smelled of old paper and quiet confidence. Mr. Albright himself was a man in his early 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He offered me a coffee and led me into a comfortable conference room. "Mrs. Wallace," he began, getting straight to the point. "First, let me offer my deepest condolences. Your husband was an incredibly thoughtful and forward-thinking man." He slid a thick portfolio across the polished table toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single, multi-page document. At the top, in clear, bold letters, were the words, "Term Life Insurance Policy." I stared at it, confused. We had life insurance, I said, a small policy through his work. It barely covered the funeral expenses. "Yes," Mr. Albright nodded. "This is a separate policy, a private one. Daniel took it out with a third-party insurer about 18 months ago. He made the premium payments from a personal savings account that he set up for this specific purpose." He pointed to a line on the page. "Policy value." Next to it was a number that made the world tilt on its axis. $5 million. I couldn't breathe, my vision swam. I looked from the paper to Mr. Albright's calm face and back again. It had to be a mistake, a typo. "5 million?" I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. That can't be right." "It's correct," he said gently. "The policy is fully vested and the claim is ready to be processed. Your husband was very meticulous." He then turned the page. Beneficiary information. There was only one name listed. Mine, Alina Wallace, 100%. Tears began to stream down my face, hot and silent. They weren't just tears of relief, but tears of profound love and overwhelming grief for the man who had, even from beyond the grave, found a way to take care of us. The man who had planned for a future he would never see. "Why?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't he tell me?" Mr. Albright leaned forward, his expression softening with empathy. "He explained his reasoning to me when we set this up, and he left a letter for you as well." He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Daniel's familiar, neat handwriting was on the front, just my name, Elena. He told me, Mr. Albright continued, that he was worried. Not about you, but about outside pressures. He saw how his family acted, particularly his parents. He said they had a way of offering advice that felt more like a demand. He worried that if they knew about a large sum of money, they would try to control it, to manage it for you, to tell you how to spend it for the good of the family. He wanted you, and only you, to have total freedom and security, with no strings attached. He called it his peace of mind policy. Every vague comment, every evasive answer Daniel had ever given his parents about our finances suddenly clicked into place. He wasn't being secretive, he was being protective. He had seen the seeds of their selfishness and control long before he had built one last, invisible fortress around us, and the key was now in my hands. The foreclosure notice, the stack of unpaid bills, the gnawing, sleepless anxiety, it could all disappear. I could keep our home. I could put Mia back in gymnastics. I could give my children the stable, secure life their father had always wanted for them. The weight that had been crushing me for months began to lift, replaced by a dizzying, breathtaking sense of possibility. But alongside the relief, that knot of anger I felt toward Beatrice, George, and Sophia began to harden into something else. Something colder and more deliberate. They had left us to drown in a shallow pool, all while we were standing on the edge of an ocean. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that they were about to get very, very thirsty. I left Mr. Albright's office in a daze, clutching the policy documents and Daniel's letter to my chest as if they were the most precious objects on earth. I walked for several blocks without any real destination, my mind a whirlwind of shock, gratitude, and a slowly simmering rage. The city sounds around me, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of people passing by, were all muted as if I were underwater. All I could hear was the number repeating in my head. $5 million. It was a sum so immense, so life-altering, that it felt more like a concept than a reality. It was safety. It was freedom. It was a future. I finally found a small, quiet park and sat on a bench, the drizzle having softened to a fine mist. My hands were shaking as I carefully opened the envelope with Daniel's letter inside. The familiar scent of his cologne, a faint trace of sandalwood and bergamot, clung to the paper, and a fresh wave of grief washed over me. It felt like he was right there with me. The letter began. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am so, so sorry. I'm sorry for the pain you must be in, and I'm sorry I'm not there to hold you through it. The thought of you and the kids facing the world without me is the only thing I have ever been truly afraid of. I know you must be confused about this policy, about why I kept it a secret. Please don't think for a second it was because I didn't trust you. I trust you with my life, with our children, with everything I am. It's because I trust you so completely that I did this. I had to protect you, not from the world, but from my own family. I love my parents and my sister, but I am not blind to their faults. They measure worth in dollars and cents, and they see control as a form of love. I saw how they judged our choices, our house, our vacations, your career. They saw your freelance work as a hobby, never as the art that it is. If they knew about this money, they would descend on you like vultures, cloaking their greed in the language of concern. They would tell you how to invest, where to live, what schools the kids should attend. They would try to manage your life, and in doing so, they would suffocate you. They would turn this gift into a gilded cage. This money is not for them. It is not to pay off their imagined debts or to secure their legacy. It is for you. It's for Mia and for Leo. I want you to live without fear. I want you to keep the house if you want to, or sell it and travel the world if that's what makes you happy. I want you to send the kids to any college they dream of. I want you to be able to focus on your art, not because you have to, but because you love to. This is your freedom, Elena. Don't let anyone, especially my family, take that from you. Live beautifully. Live for all of us. All my love forever. Daniel. I read the letter 3 times, the tears blurring his words. He had known. He had seen the truth of their character with such painful clarity. He had anticipated their betrayal and had planned for it, creating a shield he knew I would one day need. This wasn't just money, it was validation. It was the final, irrefutable proof of his love and foresight, and it was a confirmation of his family's profound selfishness. The anger I felt was no longer just a hot flush of emotion. It was crystallizing into a cold, clear purpose. Daniel had given me the tools to build a new life. He had also, unintentionally, given me the tools to dismantle the pedestal his family had built for themselves. The next few days were a blur of logistics. Mr. Albright guided me through the process with quiet efficiency. He handled the claim with the insurance company, shielding me from the endless paperwork. He helped me set up a meeting with a trusted financial advisor, a woman named Ms. Chen who specialized in wealth management. She was sharp, empathetic, and immediately understood my desire for discretion. We worked together to create a plan. The first step was to pay the claim. A wire transfer was initiated, and within 72 hours, the money was deposited into a new set of private accounts under my name only. The first thing I did was transfer enough to my old, beleaguered checking account to cover the mortgage arrears and several months of advance payments. I paid off the credit card. I paid off the car loan. With a few clicks on a computer, the crushing debts that had haunted my every waking moment were simply gone. The feeling was indescribable. It was like I had been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Ms. Chen and I then structured the rest of the funds. We created trust funds for Mia and Leo's education, ensuring their futures were secure no matter what. We set up a diversified investment portfolio designed for long-term, stable growth. A significant portion was left liquid in a high-yield savings account for emergencies and opportunities. "You are set for life, Alina," Ms. Chen told me, a warm smile on her face. "You never have to work another day if you don't want to." But I knew I would. Daniel's letter had reignited my passion. I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to thrive. I wanted to build something of my own to honor the freedom he had given me. Throughout this entire process, I maintained complete silence. To the outside world, and especially to Daniel's family, I was still the poor, grieving widow on the brink of losing her home. I continued to drive my old car. I continued to shop at the discount grocery store. I did this not just for secrecy, but to give them the space to reveal the full extent of their character. I wanted to see how long they would let me struggle. I wanted their abandonment to be total and undeniable. The silence from their end was absolute. Not a single call to check in, not a single text to ask if the kids were okay. As far as they were concerned, we had ceased to exist. They had written us off. And that was their biggest mistake. They thought they were closing a chapter. They had no idea I was about to write a whole new book, and they were not going to like the ending. With my financial future secure and the immediate threat of homelessness gone, a profound shift happened within me. The fog of grief and panic began to lift, and in its place, clarity settled in. For months, I had been in survival mode, reacting to one crisis after another. Now, for the first time since Daniel's death, I could be proactive. I could plan. I could build. Daniel's letter wasn't just a comfort, it was a mission statement. Live beautifully. I decided that was exactly what I was going to do, but I was going to do it on my own terms, quietly and strategically. My first act was one of silent defiance. I walked into the bank, the same bank where I had recently begged a stone-faced manager for an extension, and paid off the entire remaining balance of my mortgage. I didn't make a scene. I simply signed the papers, received the deed, and walked out. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immense. This house was no longer a liability or a source of anxiety. It was mine. It was my children's fortress, bought and paid for by their father's love and my newfound strength. The next week, I called the gymnastics studio and re-enrolled Mia. I told her a big freelance project had come through. The pure, unadulterated joy on her face was worth more than any amount of money. I enrolled Leo in the soccer camp he had been dreaming of. We started eating fresh, healthy food again. I even hired a cleaning service to come once a week, freeing up precious hours that I could spend with my children instead of scrubbing floors. These weren't extravagant luxuries, they were acts of reclaiming our life, of restoring the color to a world that had turned gray. My professional life transformed as well. The freedom from financial desperation reignited my creative spark. I was no longer chasing small, soul-crushing jobs for a few $100s. Instead, I started thinking bigger. I had always dreamed of starting my own boutique design agency, one that focused on branding for small, ethical businesses. It was a pipe dream, Daniel, and I had often talked about on late nights, sketching out logos on napkins. Now, it was a possibility. I used a portion of the funds to formally launch my own company. I rented a small, chic office space in a converted warehouse downtown, a place with exposed brick and great natural light. I invested in top-of-the-line equipment and software. I hired a part-time assistant to handle the administrative tasks that used to bog me down. I named the agency North Star Designs, a quiet tribute to Daniel, who had always been my guide. Word of my new venture spread slowly through professional circles. My new confidence and passion were evident in my work, and it attracted a higher caliber of clientele. I was no longer just a freelancer. I was a business owner, a creative director. I found myself in meetings with exciting entrepreneurs, helping them build their dreams from the ground up. I was energized, fulfilled, and for the first time in a long time, genuinely happy. All of this was happening under the radar. To my old life and to Daniel's family, I was invisible. I hadn't made any grand announcements. I simply and quietly began to construct a new reality for myself and my children. My plan regarding the in-laws was one of calculated patience. I knew, with the certainty of a coming storm, that they would eventually reappear. Their brand of familial loyalty was purely transactional, and they would come calling the moment they thought I had something they wanted. Sophia, the real estate agent, would be the first. She prided herself on knowing every property on the market in our town. The fact that my house never went up for sale, that the foreclosure it was heading for had mysteriously vanished from the public records, would be a loose thread she wouldn't be able to resist pulling. I was banking on her professional curiosity and her personal nosiness. I was right. About 4 months after I had paid off the house, my phone rang. It was Sophia. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I hadn't heard since before the funeral. "Elena, hi, it's been too long. I was just thinking about you and the kids and wanted to see how you were doing." It was a blatant lie, and we both knew it. "We're getting by, Sophia," I replied, my voice deliberately neutral, a little weary. "Good, good," she said quickly, before getting to her real reason for calling. "Hey, so this is a little awkward, but I was checking the property records for a client, you know how it is, and I noticed your house is no longer listed as being in pre-foreclosure. In fact, it's listed as paid in full. I was so surprised. Did a family member step in to help you out?" Her voice was laced with an almost giddy curiosity. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the opening move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. "Oh," I said, feigning surprise at her knowledge. "Yes, it's all been taken care of." I offered no further explanation. The silence on her end was palpable as she waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. "Oh, well, that's wonderful news," she finally stammered. "Mom and Dad will be so relieved to hear you landed on your feet." Relieved, the word was so absurd it was almost funny. "I'm sure they will be," I said calmly. "Well, I have to run. The kids have their activities. It was good to hear from you." I ended the call, a slow smile spreading across my face. The bait was in the water. I knew that Sophia would immediately call Beatrice and George, and the three of them would begin to speculate wildly. Where did the money come from? Did I have a secret benefactor? Did I take out a predatory loan? Their minds, which always ran toward the transactional and the suspicious, would never land on the simple truth that Daniel had outsmarted them. Their curiosity would fester, growing into a burning need to know. And when that need became great enough, they would come to me, and I would be ready. My new life wasn't just about my own success. It was about holding up a mirror to their failure. The failure to be decent, to be kind, to be family. And the reflection, I knew, was going to be ugly. The phone call from Sophia was the first tremor. The earthquake arrived 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon. It was a crisp autumn day, and I was in the backyard with Mia and Leo, raking the fallen leaves into a giant pile for them to jump in. The sound of their laughter was the purest music I knew. Then, through the fence, I saw it, George's impeccably polished sedan pulling up to the curb. My heart didn't sink, it steadied. The calm that settled over me was absolute. This was not a surprise attack. It was an appointment I had been expecting. Beatrice, George, and Sophia emerged from the car, a united front of feigned concern. They were dressed in their weekend best, Beatrice in a cashmere sweater set, George in a blazer, Sophia in designer jeans. They looked like they were coming to a business negotiation, not to visit the family they had abandoned. I told the kids to continue playing and walked around to the front of the house to meet them on the porch. I didn't invite them in. I stood with my arms crossed, creating a physical barrier. Beatrice, George, Sophia, I said, my voice even and cool, this is a surprise. Beatrice put on her best grandmotherly smile, a look that now turned my stomach. Elena, dear, we were so worried. Sophia told us the wonderful news about the house, and we had to come see for ourselves that you were all right. As you can see, we are, I replied, giving them nothing. George cleared his throat, taking the lead as he always did when money was the topic. Elena, we don't want to pry, he began, in a tone that suggested he was about to do exactly that, but we feel a certain responsibility. Daniel was our son. We were just so surprised to hear that your financial troubles resolved themselves. Sophia mentioned you were rather vague about the details. My finances are my own business, George, I stated Sophia let out a brittle laugh. Oh, Elena, don't be like that. We're family. We were just concerned you might have gotten involved with a high-interest loan or something unsavory. We want to make sure you're protected. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They wanted to protect me now after leaving me completely exposed for months. It was time to give them a little more rope. I sighed, putting on a show of reluctance. It's complicated, I said, looking down. It turns out Daniel had some investments I didn't know about. They finally paid out. It was a half-truth, plausible enough to be believable. I watched as their eyes lit up with a shared, greedy spark. Investments. To them, that meant a windfall. That meant there was more. Investments? Beatrice exclaimed, her voice a little too loud. Oh, that sounds just like him, always so clever. Well, that is a tremendous relief. For the next 10 minutes, they laid it on thick, showering me with compliments on how well the house looked, how big the kids were getting, how resilient I was. It was a transparent, nauseating performance designed to reintegrate themselves into my life now that they smelled money. And then, as I knew he would, George made his move. You know, Elena, he said, leaning against the porch railing casually, speaking of finances, your timing couldn't be better. David's business has hit a rough patch. David was Sophia's husband, a man who had a history of failed get-rich-quick schemes. And Sophia's real estate commissions have been a bit slow this quarter. We were thinking, well, now that you're in a more stable position, perhaps you'd be in a position to help the family out. A small loan just to tide them over. It's what Daniel would have wanted. There it was, the transactional nature of their love laid bare. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about what they could get from me. They hadn't come to see if we were okay. They had come to collect. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, watching them. Their expectant smiles, their entitled postures. They truly believed I owed them this. That Daniel's money was, by extension, their money. I finally uncrossed my arms and looked each of them in the eye. My voice when I spoke was devoid of all warmth. It was as cold and sharp as splintered ice. No. The word, quiet and absolute, hit them like a physical blow. George's smile faltered. I'm sorry, he said, as if he'd misheard. I said no, I repeated, enunciating every syllable. I will not be giving you or Sophia or David a single cent. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of mock outrage. Elena, how can you be so selfish? After all we've done for you. The dam of my composure broke, not with tears, but with a flood of cold, hard truth. All you've done? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Let's talk about all you've done. You sat in my living room days after my husband, your son, died, and you told me to sell my home. You watched me drown in debt and grief and did not lift a finger to help. You ignored my calls. You ignored your own grandchildren. Leo asked me if his grandma was mad at him. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To have to explain to your 7-year-old son that his family has decided he's no longer worth their time? I took a step toward them, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in their eyes. They were used to being in control, to being the ones who passed judgment. They weren't prepared for the judgment to be turned on them. "You left us," I said, my voice rising with every word of condemnation. "You abandoned us when we needed you most. You wrote us off as a bad investment. The only person who cared, the only person who planned to make sure we were safe was Daniel. He saw you for exactly what you are, selfish, greedy, and transactional. He knew you would do this." Sophia scoffed. "What are you talking about? What did Daniel do?" "He left me a life insurance policy," I said, delivering the final, devastating blow. "A very, very large one. And he left me a letter explaining exactly why he kept it a secret from you. Because he knew you would see it as your personal bank account. He knew you would try to control me. He did it to protect us from you." The truth landed in the space between us with the force of a bomb. Their faces went through a rapid-fire succession of emotions: shock, disbelief, fury, and finally, the ugly, contorted mask of pure envy. "This money," I concluded, my voice steady and powerful again, "is Daniel's legacy of love for his wife and his children. It is not a family slush fund. You are not entitled to it. You are not welcome in our lives. A debt has come due today, but it is not a financial one. It's a moral one, and you are bankrupt. Now I suggest you get off my property." For a moment, no one moved. They just stared at me, this new version of Alina they had never seen before. Not a victim, but a queen in her own castle. Then, without another word, they turned and walked back to their car, their arrogant postures gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of the utterly defeated. As they drove away, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound sense of peace. The door was closed. The ghosts were banished. The future was mine. The confrontation on my front porch was not the explosive, dramatic climax of a movie. There was no shouting match that echoed through the neighborhood, no satisfying tears of remorse from them. It was a clean, sharp amputation. In the days and weeks that followed, a profound quiet settled over my life where the static of their influence used to be. It was the sound of freedom. I had expected backlash, perhaps angry phone calls or nasty emails, but there was nothing. Their silence this time was not one of abandonment, but of shame and impotence. They had no leverage, no moral high ground, and no way to spin the narrative to their friends and community. They couldn't play the part of the devoted, grieving family, helping the poor widow when the poor widow was now financially independent and wanted nothing to do with them. They had been so thoroughly and completely outmaneuvered by their own son that there was simply nothing left for them to do. Their retreat was total. Sophia, I heard through town gossip, became increasingly bitter. Her real estate business, which she had always flaunted, took a downturn. People in our small town talked, and while I never spoke a word about what happened, the story of their abandonment somehow seeped into the community's consciousness. Perhaps friends who had witnessed their initial support and then their sudden disappearance connected the dots. Whatever the reason, Sophia's reputation as a trustworthy agent suffered. People prefer to do business with those they perceive as decent. Her professional life, which she had prioritized over her own family, began to crumble. George and Beatrice became reclusive. They had always been pillars of their social circle, the retired bank manager and the respectable school principal. But now, they seemed to avoid community events. They had built their identities on a foundation of respectability and control, and I had exposed it as a hollow facade. Their punishment wasn't financial ruin. It was the loss of the one thing they valued more than money: their status. They were forced to live with the knowledge that their son had seen their true nature so clearly that he had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect his family from them. That was a legacy they couldn't escape. My life, in contrast, blossomed. North Star Designs became a resounding success. I found my niche, and my passion for my work translated into beautiful, effective branding for my clients. My reputation grew, not just locally, but regionally. I hired 2 more full-time designers and an office manager. I was no longer just a business owner, I was a mentor, a leader. I was creating a positive impact, building something meaningful from the ground up, all on my own terms. My victory wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, built day by day in the life I created. It was in the laughter of my children as they thrived, secure and happy. Mia was excelling in gymnastics, her confidence soaring. Leo was the star of his soccer team, a happy-go-lucky boy unburdened by the drama that had once threatened to engulf us. It was in the peace of my own home, a place that was once a source of terror and was now a sanctuary of warmth and safety. I began to date again, cautiously at first. I met a man, an architect named Thomas, who was kind, funny, and respected my independence and my story. He loved my children as his own, and he celebrated my success without a hint of insecurity. He wasn't a replacement for Daniel, but a wonderful new chapter I never expected to have. Our life was simple, beautiful, and profoundly normal. Years passed. The in-laws never reached out again, and I made no effort to contact them. They became like characters from a distant story, their memory fading with each passing happy year. One day, Mr. Albright called me. He informed me that George had passed away, and that Beatrice, now frail and alone, had been moved into a nursing home. Her will had left everything to Sophia, but after years of financial mismanagement, there was little left to inherit. Mr. Albright asked if I wanted to send condolences. I thought about it for a long moment, not with anger, but with a distant, clinical sadness. "No, thank you, Mr. Albright," I said politely. "That chapter is closed." My ultimate victory wasn't in their downfall, but in my rise. It wasn't about revenge, it was about resilience. Daniel had given me a safety net, but I was the one who had to learn to fly. I had built a life so full of love, purpose, and joy that there was simply no room left for bitterness or regret. My revenge was the beautiful life I was living, a life they had tried to prevent. Were now forced to witness from a distance. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had not only survived, but I had thrived. I had honored Daniel's final wish. I had lived beautifully, and in doing so, I had become the architect of my own quiet victory.